Hey everybody, we're gonna spend a little time talking about the reproductive system. And the reproductive system is unique amongst our body systems. Um, you may have learned something about the digestive system, maybe a little bit about the nervous system or the muscular system, the endocrine system that makes our hormones. All of those other systems are focused on keeping us alive. They're focused on maintaining homeostasis. Homeostasis is a principle of physiology that um, focuses on keeping the conditions inside of a living cell or a living body of a human or an animal or even a plant. It's keeping those conditions constant, conditions that are optimal for life. So our other body systems are focused on keeping us alive, maintaining homeostasis, and the reproductive system is different. A function of the fact that we all die. And if we are going to continue as a species, if any group of organisms is going to continue as a species, because we all die, we better leave some babies to take our place once we go. And so that's the function of reproduction. Physiology is a branch of biology that deals with the functioning of living things. And if you weren't aware, my name is Wendell Thomas, and I'm the Director of Curriculum and Instruction at Rowland Hall. But I'm also an old biology teacher, an old physiology teacher, and that's my training is as a physiologist. And in fact, my specialty is reproductive physiology. So if you have any questions about the things that we're talking about, I'd love to talk to you more about it because I can geek out with some reproductive physiology. All right, so let's get into it. So as we get started, I just want to point out that using a video lecture like this to share information with students can be highly effective if you all choose to make the most of this medium, of this technique. And that means taking advantage of the fact that this is a video. You can pause it at any time to read over things that are on the slides. You can pause it to look up something that you're not sure about. You can pause it to write down some notes and maybe a question to bring back to class, to ask your teacher, or to bring back to school and to try to ask me. So take advantage of the format, take advantage of the video, and use that pause button as much as you need to. All right, so one of the funny things I think about reproduction is that we have two parents. It doesn't need to be this way. There are lots of species of plants and animals that don't have two parents, that only have one parent. But humans and most other complex animals have evolved sexual reproduction where we have two parents. So if reproduction is about passing on traits to your offspring through our chromosomes, those are those structures in our cells, in the nuclei of cells, that contain the genes that are the instructions for life. Well, passing on those chromosomes is a central part of what reproduction is all about. So how is it that we get from our cells, which contain 46 chromosomes, to an offspring produced by two parents that also has 46? How do we manage that? Well, you may have learned about a process called meiosis. Meiosis is a special type of cell division where we take our 23 pairs of chromosomes that we inherited from our parents and we split up the pairs. And we take one of each from each pair and separate them into separate sex cells, gametes they are called. And gametes are either sperm or eggs, or ova. Singular is ovum. So by separating those pairs, we have a single set of chromosomes instead of a pair of chromosomes, 2 sets. And then when a sperm and an egg unite through fertilization, we're back to the correct number again in the zygote, which can grow up to be an adult. There are 2 chromosomes out of the 23 pairs, so one of our pairs of chromosomes that generally will determine our sex. And the sex chromosomes are called X and Y. The X chromosome is the big structure that you see in the electron micrograph there. X chromosomes are robust, large chromosomes that have lots of important genes on them. You cannot survive as a human being without an X chromosome. Y chromosomes, as you can tell from the picture, are kind of dinky. They're smallish, we'll say. And Y chromosomes have a couple of important genes for determining the sex of a human being, but really no genes that are important for survival. And that is, a story that's pretty easy to tell looking at the human population, where about half of us don't have a Y chromosome, so they must not be essential for survival. The Y chromosome does have some genes that switch on the male reproductive system, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. So, what determines if you wind up being boy or girl? It's generally, although things are complicated and there are always exceptions, but it's generally by the sex chromosome you inherit from your father. Females have 2 X chromosomes, so when they separate their sex chromosomes, females can only donate an X chromosome to one of their offspring. Men have X and Y chromosomes in general, and so when they separate their sex chromosomes, they can have a sperm that has either an X or a Y chromosome in it. So if you inherit XY, typically you are male, and if you inherit XX, typically you're female. And the reason the XY individuals wind up being male is that there is a gene on the Y chromosome called the testis determining factor that produces a protein that basically switches on your gonads. Gonads are the sex glands of humans or other animals, and it switches the gonads on to be testes. And as we'll see in a slide that's coming up, our gonads start off being undifferentiated. They are just sex glands, and they can become either testes or ovaries, the female sex glands. And if this testis determining factor is there and it works properly, the gonads will become testes. If it is not there, then they will become ovaries. Here is what the male and female external genitalia looks like as it develops. We start off with structures that are neither male nor female. And doesn't matter whether you're a boy or a girl. This is what we all start out looking like. We've got these parts down there between our legs that look like they might be male or might be female. Can't really tell. And if this testis determining factor switches on and the gonads develop into testes, they start producing testosterone, the male sex hormone. And testosterone is responsible for switching the reproductive organs on the outside, the external genitalia, into male parts, whereas an absence of testosterone will cause the undifferentiated genitalia to develop into female parts. In fact, we have 2 sets of internal plumbing when we start off, which was a fascinating thing when I first learned about this. We all start off with both male and female reproductive plumbing when we are a small embryo, an early fetus. And depending on what happens with the gonads, we will either switch on one or the other of these duct systems. And they're called Wolffian ducts and Mullerian ducts. So we start off at the top here when we are very early on in our fetal development with two different systems of ductwork, two different plumbing systems for our reproductive system. And we have our bipotential gonads, the gonads that haven't been determined as testes or ovaries yet. If in most cases we are XY, then that testis determining factor will switch on the gonads to become testes. The testes will start producing testosterone, and the Wolffian duct will start to mature, and the Mullerian duct will start to degenerate, and it will basically just be reabsorbed by the body as it grows. If there is no testis determining factor, if there's no testis determining factor, then the gonads will become ovaries, and the Wolffian duct in this case will degenerate and be reabsorbed, and the Mullerian duct will mature and grow into the parts of the female reproductive system. So we start with a single pair of gonads that can be either boy or girl, testes or ovaries, and we start with two sets of internal plumbing. And depending on what our gonads become, either testes or ovaries, we will develop the appropriate internal plumbing that matches our gonads. We'll talk about hormones a lot with the reproductive system because reproductive functioning is driven by hormones. And these two diagrams show the critical hormones that are coming from our pituitary gland that control our reproductive glands, either testes or ovaries. So the pituitary gland is this little bulb-shaped gland that hangs down from the base of our brain. The hypothalamus is part of the brain. And in response to stimulation from the brain, the pituitary gland releases two important hormones. And this is true in both males and females. LH, which stands for luteinizing hormone, you don't need to know that. FSH, which stands for follicle stimulating hormone, you don't need to know that either. But those are the two hormones that are released by the pituitary gland in both males and females. And those hormones stimulate the sex glands, the testes and the ovaries. And those hormones are responsible for driving the reproductive functioning that's going on down in those sex glands. So you guys are familiar, I'm sure, because you've gotten some of this stuff in health classes and special seminars you've attended about the changes that occur during puberty. And here's a summary of that. You guys can pause the video if you want to look at this, but you've seen these before. Changes in girls and changes in boys. And again, you can pause the video and check these out if you want to look at them more carefully. The specific actions of the male hormones, androgens, are a category of hormones that include testosterone and other similar hormones. So these are the male steroid hormones, and they drive these sort of masculinizing changes that happen when boys develop into men. And again, I'll let you pause this if you want to. And these are things that probably you're aware of, at least some of them. Some other things may be new. And a couple of other things to wrap up about puberty. One of the things that you've probably noticed during your middle school careers is that girls tend to develop a little earlier than boys in terms of their physical growth. And this shows that females on average start a growth spurt between the ages of 10 and 11. And then they shoot up, and then very often 6th grade, 5th and 6th, and even 7th grade, we have lots of girls who are taller than boys because they started this growth spurt earlier. And then 6th, 7th grade, the boys' growth spurt kicks in, and by the time you're 14 or 15, in 8th grade, going into 9th grade, on average, the boys tend to pass the girls and become a little bit taller. Whoa, my goodness. I think that's a good place to stop here on the male reproductive anatomy. We'll pick this up in the next video.